Welcome to the 30th episode of Certum Group's podcast, Alternative Litigation Strategies, where I interview industry leaders in the legal marketplace from the top companies, firms, and academic institutions across the country. On this program, we discuss the latest trial strategies and trends impacting the litigation industry. I'm your host, Kevin Skrzysowski, a director with the litigation consulting firm Certum Group, where we specialize in working with businesses and their outside counsel to mitigate, cap, and transfer litigation outcome risk through our suite of finance and insurance solutions. Today, we have a very interesting program because we're going to dive into a topic we've never covered on this program before, and that is the latest eDiscovery challenges, strategies, pitfalls, and best practices that law firms should be aware of today. And to discuss this topic, I am pleased to be joined by W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, a technology evangelist with S2 Data, an author of 4 books on modern data protection, and the host of the podcast, The Backup Wrap-Up. Curtis, thank you for joining the program today.
Anytime. Glad to be here.
Curtis, maybe it would be a good idea if we started just by you telling us about the current business you're involved in, S2 Data, and the range of services that you provide.
So we like to talk about turning difficult things into opportunity. We tackle a lot of the really difficult technical problems that are behind a lot of different things. One part of the company specializes in the legal side of things, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Electronic discovery. On that side, we also do forensic services, imaging every kind of computing type device, which is a giant tent, right? That includes everything from a cell phone to a dash cam, right? And then on the other side, we also work with IT departments that are managing their legacy data. So in our world, what that means is just as companies move forward in technology, they often buy new things, right? They buy new services. They move from this backup software to that backup software, and that leaves behind other sort of orphaned technology, which we call legacy technology. And then we help them manage the part of their company that perhaps a significant part of their IT department doesn't know how to manage. So we help with that as well.
So really a full service 360-degree eDiscovery and computer technology services that you provide. Now, since we're going to focus really on the legal industry today, can you tell us a little bit about what percentage of your client base are law firms or in-house counsel, and what are some of the particular services that you offer to them?
Yeah, so I'm going to say it's probably 60-40. That is a very unscientific number based on the fact that I don't run the books. So based on what I see in the meetings, right? We spend a lot of time in our meetings talking about the various eDiscovery services that we're providing. And we spend a lot of time talking to lawyers, either in-house counsel or third-party counsel, to help people with those types of things. And when we look at those, I'd say the biggest service that we're providing is this, a client has been presented with an eDiscovery request, and they either don't have the resources to do it, or they are presented with a significant, and then we'll talk about this, I'm sure, significant technical challenge in satisfying that request, right? So we'll step in and basically get all of the data that they need to get. We do that in such a way that, we have a very documented and proven methodology, and we can then provide the data, and we can provide an affidavit as to how that data was procured. And even depending on the client, even testifying on the stand if that's necessary. And then also very closely related to that, but on the back end, very different, is this idea of forensic discovery. So if there's a lawsuit or a potential lawsuit, then what we're able to do is take, as I was saying before, phones, laptops, dash cams, security systems, any sort of thing that's recording data and then storing it electronically. We can image that. One of the biggest things I think there is text messages. So there are a lot of lawsuits that come down to who said what to when, and text messages are the, sort of the modern equivalent to email. Email, of course, would be the biggest thing that we're pulling out, a typical eDiscovery request. But text messages, you can retrieve directly from a cell phone. And then we also have, as part of that service, one of the challenges is that when the text messages come out, They're kind of ugly. They're often in like a spreadsheet, which is the way most people do it. But we figured out a way to present them back to the client and therefore be able to present in court to look like the way they would have looked on the cell phone with, you're familiar with like the green on the left and the blue on the right, all of that stuff, preserving the order of the conversation and who said what and when and how. And we're able to do that as well.
Very interesting. I want to dive into some of the technical challenges that firms face, and I want to talk a little bit more about specific challenges around text messages. But before we get there, can you just perhaps give us, in just layman's terms, an overview of what the eDiscovery process really looks like?
Yeah. So on your side, it's pretty straightforward. We need all of the emails that Curtis wrote in the last 5 years that contain these 3 words, right? Or we just need all of the emails. We're not sure what to look for, but we need all of the emails written from Curtis to Steve. The requests can be all sorts of different filters. Before any discovery request comes in, a company is on a very regular basis, just any company or governmental organization, they are, or a nonprofit, they are most likely, any reasonable company is backing up
the data, right?
Yeah. On a regular basis, they're doing it. And they're typically doing it actually every day, right? So you'll do a full backup, which would back up everything. You do that every so often. And then every day you're doing what we would call an incremental backup, backing up the data that's changed. And you've been doing that and you hold on to that data for, in my opinion, far longer than you should, unless you have some sort of regulatory reason to hold on to it. But people will hold on to that data for 5 years, 7 years, whatever, maybe even 10 years. And then you get this discovery request and it says, we'll pull out all the emails from Curtis to Steve. The problem is that 2 things. One is, again, speaking specifically in the US, right? The FRCP guidelines say that if you've got the data, you have to surrender it, right? It doesn't say, well, if you've got the data, but it's in an inconvenient format, you don't have to surrender it, right? But the problem is that the data is stored in backup format, which was never intended to be used as a source for eDiscovery. It's meant to be used as a way to bring back your server to the way it looked yesterday, or bring back your laptop because you dropped it and it shattered into a million pieces. That's the purpose of backup. And so when an eDiscovery request comes in, the process of pulling the data out of these, just to speak specifically of email, pulling email out of the backup is an incredibly huge, very painful process that can take many, many months, using many, many people, and also a significant amount of resources from a technical perspective, meaning the hardware, the computers and the storage and the tapes and the disks, all of that. It requires a significant amount of resource, much more than they would typically do in a typical week.
And what I think I'm hearing from you is that there's tapes and there's disks, there may be cloud storage. So I know, having worked for many legal information technology companies for the last 20, 25 years, they invest or reinvest in different enterprise software and computer systems. I would imagine that these systems have changed over time, and now you have to go back and try to extract that data from many different formats, from many different systems, through many different filters. Is that one of the main challenges?
I'd say yes. That is definitely one of the challenges.
Sure.
In that the more often you've switched up your backup technology, the more often you've changed it up. You talked about changing the backup software. You talk about moving to one of the big tape drives that we use is called LTO. That's easily the predominant tape technology for the last 10, 15 years. But there's LTO 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to LTO 9. And you move forward in these tape drives in order to keep up with the latest technology. And you cannot read, for example, an LTO 1 tape and even an LTO 4 drive. There is a certain amount that you can do, but the more tapes you have and the more often you changed it over the years, the more complicated the process becomes. But the real challenge is not so much the hardware, it's actually the software. Again, going back to what I was saying earlier, that the problem is that the format that it's put onto tape or onto disk or in the cloud the format was never written or stored in a way to allow you to retrieve it the way a lawyer is looking for. You go to pick your favorite backup software product with, I'd say, one exception. I can say one backup product if you purchase their extra feature that they have. Most backup products, if you go to it, there is no interface to go to say, give me all of the emails from Curtis to Steve for the last 3 years. It just doesn't exist. So what you end up having to do is, let's say you've got a request for 3 years worth of emails. You go to 3 years ago and you restore your entire email system to the way it looked 3 years ago. And obviously you're not doing this to your production system. You're doing this to some alternate system. So of course this means more resources. You're restoring it to that system, and then you'll extract from that system. You just start up this email server and you run a search against the email server for what it is that you're looking for. And you create a common format would be the PST file, right, in Exchange. So you create this Exchange file that contains the emails that you were looking for from 3 years ago. And this is going to take you many, many hours, maybe days, depending on your level of competence and resources you have available to you. And then you do 3 years minus a week ago, and you do the whole process again. And then you do 3 years minus 2 weeks ago, and you do the whole process again. And so you're doing, like, if you've got a weekly full backup of Exchange, Exchange is a very common email backup system.
Right.
If you've got a weekly full backup of Exchange, you're looking at 52 times 3 full restores of your system, followed by an extraction each time. It is an incredible process that needs a significant amount of hardware, a significant amount of time and expertise, because this is a very complicated process that you need to be able to defend in court. And so it's just, the problem is really that you're using a tool that was never designed to do what you need it to do in order to do what you need to do.
It sounds like almost every matter almost takes a Herculean effort to compile all this so that it's in like a usable and digestible format and can be shared in Discovery.
I may sound like Henny Penny here, but it is a significant effort. You know, it's so easy for a lawyer to say, hey, here's the eDiscovery request. Hey, IT guys, go figure that out. The other part of this, it's just, number one, it is a really difficult, technologically challenging problem because the product that you're using to do it was never designed to do what you want it to do. But number two, you also typically have, in today's environment, IT departments with zero resources because they're already stretched thin. And so they barely have the resources to accomplish what it is that they're supposed to be doing. And then on top of that, you give them this Herculean effort. So it's a real challenge. And either one of two things happens. Either basically the IT department gets the significant impact to them and they're able to do it in what a judge considers to be an acceptable amount of time, or they could actually take too long or make mistakes. So that would be the worst, is make mistakes along the way. And your risk is you get an adverse inference instruction from the judge that basically is the death knell of a lawsuit, right? Say, look, nobody could be this bad at reading their tapes. Just assume that they're trying to hide something, right? And there's a famous case or infamous case with Morgan Stanley versus Coleman Holdings back in 2005, where that exactly happened, and they lost a $2 billion lawsuit as a result. So that's sort of the problem.
Now, I mean, eDiscovery has been around for a number of years, but I would imagine when you're working directly with attorneys and you're trying to explain how labor intensive this is, how many resources it requires, how many different iterations of hardware and software you need to perform this function, they must be quite surprised at the length of time, especially when you're dealing with lawyers, especially partners who are used to giving an assignment to an associate and say, draft this brief or give me a reply and I need it by the morning, right?
Yeah, here, go figure it out. Yeah.
Do you find that this is incredibly surprising to lawyers and it's challenging for them to digest?
It is. It's challenging for a couple of reasons. One, it requires understanding some rather technical nuances, right? And also IT people. I mean, I love them. They're my people. Okay. I've been in IT for over 30 years. we kind of have a history of going, oh, that's really hard. I don't want to do it. Right. And so that doesn't help. And so what they hear when an IT person is trying to say, look, what you're asking me to do is actually really, really difficult. I think the very natural response is to not believe it or to think that they're exaggerating it. And I guess what I'm trying to do, and by the way, I've always had this. I've worked for S2 now for about 9 months. It's not like I'm just now singing this tune. I've been talking about this for years, that backup was never intended to do eDiscovery. And what I've historically been pushing people to do is to, if they've got a reason to keep data for many, many years, to not use the backup system, to use a different kind of system, which is called an email archive system. But nobody's been listening to me. So the vast majority of the IT departments, they don't have the time or the budget to create an entirely separate system, just in the, I don't know what the hopes is the wrong word, in the thought that they might someday get an eDiscovery request, right? They'll just say, look, we'll just do backup. And then they also get surprised when they find out just how difficult it is. So yeah, the IT departments are surprised. So the lawyers, if they've never interacted with, directly with their IT department with any eDiscovery requests, I do think lawyers are quite surprised.
And then how do you get the information so that it's actually in a usable, shareable format in Discovery? I mean, when lawyers are doing Discovery, they do a request for production of documents, request for admission interrogatories, and it's simple like English prose. It's just English language written down on a page, and they can read the answers to it. When they're doing an eDiscovery and they're trying to extract emails from many years ago that might be on a tape, what does the information look like when it comes out, and how do you get it so that it just looks like written English language and can be shared during the discovery process?
Yeah, so you need some type of format of a file that we can all agree on. Usually, right, 90% of the time, we're talking about Exchange, which is, it's either Exchange or it's Exchange replacement, which is Microsoft 365, which is their cloud version of that. But all of these can be exported into a format. A common format would be PST. That is a format of a file that can be fed into a review platform that then allows them to sort and play with it and search against it easily. It is English. You can take Outlook, which is a piece of software to read email, and you can open a PST file and you can look at it and it all looks normal and you see emails and you can search against it. But what most people are going to do is they're going to take that and import that into a review platform. And there are several of those out there. But the hard part is getting it out of the very proprietary backup format and into that exportable format.
Understood. Okay. Now we're talking about emails that are exchanged, or maybe there's some other types of communication systems within the enterprise of the law firm or the corporate legal department. You had mentioned cell phones earlier. That's a whole nother animal. I mean, those are not connected, hardwired to the communications infrastructure necessarily of a firm, right? These are going through another proprietary network of cell towers. How do you deal with that problem? And then what about the issue where people might be using their personal phones for business use? And how does that fall under the guise of like eDiscovery, and what unique challenges does that present?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's no easy answer, right? And I don't think I have a good answer there in terms of the personal cell phone. I will say that even if you're using a personal cell phone for company work, the data that's on that phone is still company property. And I would think this is more a legal question than a technical question. And that is that you could certainly attempt, as opposing counsel, you could say, I want everything that, every time this guy was texting this guy, I want all those, even if it's on personal cell phones. And I would think that you would probably be able to demand that discovery. Where I really come in is assuming that has happened, whether it's a personal cell phone or a company cell phone. How do you get those messages? There's two ways. One is you can actually subpoena the communications company and potentially get the data that way. But another, probably more common way, and this is where we get involved, is you just get that phone, right?
You physically
take that phone for a period of time and you extract directly from that phone. Again, this is highly specialized, requires very expensive software to extract that data off that phone. And then you have, you talk about human readable. It's human readable, but it's not very pretty. Think of like a spreadsheet, which is what typically does. But we've figured out a way to present that in a much more human readable format where it's literally just an image that you can see behind what the conversation was.
Almost like screenshots. Like a rolling screenshot, reverse chronological.
Right.
Okay. So you've raised a lot of the unique sort of like challenges that law firms and in-house departments are facing today and a lot of the pitfalls to try to avoid. If you were to sum up, just like, what do you think is the one biggest challenge that is facing law firms today when it comes to eDiscovery, and how does S2 data solve it? What would that be?
Yeah. So I'm going to say that it's the format, the backup format that most of the data that you're trying to extract is sitting in, right? It's sitting in this very proprietary format on a tape drive or a disk or a cloud. And it's in this weird format that most people are not going to be able to read. And then if you're using the backup software to try to do it, the backup software was never designed to do it. So it doesn't know what to do. And so, like I said earlier, you're presented with a Herculean task. I love your term there. Presented with a Herculean task of just doing it over and over and over again and extracting the data. It is a huge task to do. The way we've figured out to do is we have figured out how to go directly at the data, basically just ignoring the backup software that wrote the data in the first place. We've written proprietary software that knows how to directly read the backup disk or tape where that data happens to reside. And we're able to directly extract. You can tell us, we're looking for PDFs with this name. We're looking for emails from Curtis, and we can directly extract that and do this like as a, before, remember how I said you have to do this like full restore and then individual extractions. We're able to do that as like a single pass and do it much like literally like an order of magnitude quicker for two reasons. One is we have this proprietary software that's written specifically for eDiscovery. And two, that we have specialists that this is all they do. And three, we have a ton of hardware, whereas the typical IT department, they have just enough servers and tape drives and storage arrays, whatever it is that they're using to get the backup done. They have just enough hardware to get the job, their normal everyday job done. We have an entire bank of tape drives that are just, and robots and all that kind of stuff that are just sitting there waiting to do eDiscovery requests, right? So we can be doing simultaneous eDiscovery requests for multiple clients, and we can automate it in such a way that it can run 24 hours a day. So it's purpose-built system with a lot of extra hardware and people with expertise is how we're solving this problem. And so what the customer can do is they can literally say, we have this eDiscovery request. It looks like this. These are the things that we're supposed to find. Here's all our tapes. Here's all our disks, whatever it is, and just handle that for us. And we actually have different clients. We work with different ways. Some they don't want their data to leave their building, but some are fine with sending us their backups. We purchased a former bank. So we actually have a vault, an actual vault that we're storing tapes in. So we take the tapes in. We can do it as a full service where you just send us your backups. We do with them what you want. We also put all of the data, once we've scanned all of the tapes, we extract the metadata. There's another technical term. So the metadata is all of the information about the emails, right? So the backups, when they were done, who they were from, all of that sort of stuff. We put that data, file names, all of that sort of stuff. You put that up into an online portal that, can be searched against for further requests. Or we can do this on premises for a customer that doesn't want to send their data out. But basically, you just outsource the entire operation.
Understood. I mean, it sounds like with the proprietary software that you've developed, and I'm sure there's a proprietary algorithm, my words, embedded in there so that you can complete the discovery request, the massive amount of infrastructure that you've built and the security that you have in your vault, you've really created a best-in-class eDiscovery service for law firms and in-house counsel.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, we even handle encrypted tapes. So for those that don't know, when you write a backup tape, you can actually encrypt the backups. as you're writing it to tape, and actually the tape drive does that. There's an encryption key that's stored somewhere. You give us that key, and we can actually decrypt the tapes, again, without the backup software, which is very nice.
And now that's the forensics portion of your business.
No, it's just part of the backup. It's just part of interfacing with the backup system, a normal backup software product. Anytime it wants to interact with encrypted tapes, it has to pass the key to the tape drive and says, hey, I need to read this tape. Here's the key. And then the tape drive would decrypt it. We just do the same thing. Our proprietary piece of software, which is called TRACS, by the way, TRCS. And it just basically pretends to be the backup software and says, hey, we need to read this tape drive. Here's the key, right?
Well, it sounds like you've created some very efficient solutions for very common problems that are plaguing the litigation marketplace. This has been a very interesting conversation. A lot of this I really was unaware of, as we've discussed. Many lawyers are unaware of the complexities of fulfilling and satisfying an eDiscovery request. So if you had maybe one piece of overarching guidance you could give to a firm or an in-house counsel to help or to produce a best practices in eDiscovery, what would it be?
It'll sound self-serving, but it's still my best advice. And that is, don't do it yourself. It's far more complex than you think it is. It's far more expensive than you think it is to do it yourself. You think you're saving yourself money by doing it yourself, but it will extend the time out significantly to the point that, depending on how things go, you could end up looking like you're trying to hide something to a judge. And that is, as I mentioned earlier, it's a disaster.
That is
right.
Yes.
So if you've got a company like S2 Data that can do it for you, it will save you money in the long run and potentially actually help win the case. Now, here's a perfect thing. Everybody thinks they're innocent, right? Everybody thinks either they didn't do it. There's a million innocent people in prison, right? No company wants to think that they're the ones that did the thing. They want to think that the smoking gun email is not there. If that's truly the case, having a third party go and search all of your backups thoroughly with a proven methodology, documented, that you then have either an affidavit or someone testifying on your behalf to say, look, this is what we do for a living. We have searched all of the backups. The smoking gun email isn't there. There's nothing more powerful than that from a defense standpoint.
What you're providing to that business, you're proving it, and you're giving them the certainty that backs up their belief that they truly are innocent or not liable or right.
Absolutely.
I think that's an excellent point to finish up on. Well, Curtis, this has been a really interesting conversation. I want to thank you for joining the program today. I appreciate all of the really interesting and valuable insights you provided into the world and the technical challenges of eDiscovery. Thanks for being on.
Anytime.
Now, if any members of the audience or any firms or in-house counsel who are listening to this podcast would like to get a hold of you, what would be the best way to reach you?
So I'm C. Preston at s2data.com. That's S2, the number 2, data.com. We actually have an offer on, so if you go to s2data.com/podcast offer, I created basically, if you've got, so many people have a drawer of tapes, a pile of tapes, and they don't know what's on them. And you're like, can these people really just scan my tapes and figure them out? And the answer is yes. So we have an offer. If you go to that, basically, we'll scan one of those for you for free to show you what we can do and show you how easily we can solve that problem for you.
I think that's a great offer. Thanks again for being on. And of course, as always, I want to thank the audience for listening. If you'd like to hear more, please be sure to follow us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or anywhere you listen to your favorite podcast. And if you'd like to learn more about the litigation insurance and funding solutions that Certum Group provides, please visit our website at www.certumgroup.com. That's CERTUM Group. Or you can always reach out to me at kevins@certumgroup.com. And until next time.